So when I go back and I look at the history of metals and you look at like steel and aluminum, those two commodities, stainless steel too, we can argue, the advent of China's growth is what spurred all of this price volatility in markets. And so anybody that came into the profession in 2004 doesn't know anything but volatility. Some of us who came before that remember days when, the price was very flat and stable. So I'll start by saying that dynamic is what sort of lay the groundwork for the impact that China had in rare earths and some of the other metals that it went after. So we study the behavior, the price action of all of these, what I call exchange traded, or let's call them more liquid contracts or materials like hot rolled coil, or even some of the more, some of the different strains of that cold rolled coil, hot dip galvanized. But there's still kind of what I call widely traded metals, and price discovery is an easy thing to do. That's not the case for a lot of other metals, and we'll get to the whole clean tech has kind of impacted that. So
Sure.
as China, grew in economic strength, as it became a more dominant player, from a consumption standpoint, but also as it started entering into these other areas where they weren't before, particularly around, aerospace and defense, their automotive industry. We're talking massive transformation. We won't get into all the details of how they got a lot of that, but basically in the mid twos, maybe 2010, not, quite a while ago, the Chinese government began to realize, exactly where it could create strategic competitive advantage and which markets it was going to own well in advance. And I'm sure you probably have some perspectives on where that went in terms of energy markets and what things it was going to own. But it was going to own the solar panel industry, it was going to own EVs, et cetera. And so, they were very, 15 years ago telling us that rare earths are the new oil of China. And because nearly all rare earths and a lot of other, I call them the obscure metals, if you will, the ones that are not very liquid, where there's not a whole bunch of players in the marketplace. China became the dominant player, but they started planning for it in 2010, and if not even earlier than that, in part of their 5-year plenary session kind of documents. And so now coming back to the original question you asked, which is, how do they control the price? Well, if you want to own a market and you're the monopoly supplier, essentially, you can tank the price on everything in order to drive out all the competition and own the market. And it's kind of when you're a monopoly power, you have, you get that option to do that, right? And that's essentially what China's done for some of these more obscure metals. And they know that, for example, antimony is really critical for lead acid batteries. It's also used in a ton of aerospace and defense applications and US weapons systems and all of that. They knew this, and that's how they've been able to control it.